My name is Kate, and I am the founding principal of Harvest Collegiate High School. We're in Union Square. We're actually a partner school to many schools that I can see here. And I have had the honor of working with the Academy because I have sent so many of our teachers to your master classes. They always come back energized with a renewed love for what they do. But this is a special day for me because it's the first time that I myself am getting to go to one and experience it firsthand. So I love what I do because I think as the school leader, I can, I'm trying to hold the space in this time of challenge of what Martin Luther King calls a beloved community. And that is a utopian vision, but one that he thought we could accomplish by living together in an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood where the richness of the earth is distributed. So, and Betty is going to inspire us about how to get there today, because we're going to need all the creativity we have. So my teachers have gone to different workshops at the Academy on microbes to jazz, mathematical patterns. One of them made a podcast. One of them went out west studying Indigenous traditions. They have always come back for the better and have been able to bring this to our students. So we are here today to learn both from this master, Betty Yu. Betty is a multimedia artist, photographer, filmmaker, and activist, and co-founder of the Chinatown Art Brigade. Her work integrates documentary film, new media platforms, and is all about community, which is part of our theme that we're working on here today. So I got to learn a little bit about her recent exhibit, Imagining Degentrified Futures. And I think in this time when we're all confronting multiple crises, obviously COVID, but also a national reckoning with our centuries of racial injustice that's foundational to America, and climate crisis, we really need to be imagining together, how do we make this future? And are we being bold enough together in how we make it? So we are so excited to learn from your work and your example in this, Betty. And in the spirit of community, Betty is not the only star here, but it's my honor to also introduce and learn from you all the other 24 teachers who were selected from many applicants. So they sent me a little bit of information about you. It's an impressive group with advanced degrees in visual arts, education, dance, art therapy, creative writing, combined media. We teach grades K to 12 and early college in public schools, charter schools, and independent schools. There's a lot of teaching experience here today, from filmmaking, urban ecology, social justice art, robotics club. I like this one called PICA, which stands for Projects in Contemporary Art, English as a Second Language, intro photography, advanced photography, a librarian, social studies, digital art, studio art, yearbook, career day, alumni day, student government. We could go on and on. And together we teach between 800 and 600 students. The number of children who know our names is 4,294, and that's this year alone. So your real audience today, Betty, are those 4,294 kids, because every teacher here will in some way share with them what we learned from you. The ripple effect of this masterclass is huge. So thank you, Professor Yu, for being here, and thank you for my fellow teachers for teaching. And with that, let the masterclass begin. Take it away, Betty. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. I appreciate that. I know I wish that there were several hours where we can all actually talk even in this virtual circle, because I'm sure there's such a wealth of experience here. Just even the little breakout group that we had, I wanted to hear more. I had a lot of questions, and it sounds like there's just just so much here, just and so much power in this group here. But I was just gonna thank you, the Academy, for inviting me to do this. I'm really, really, really honored. I started to look at the list of previous speakers, and I was like, oh my, I can't hold a candle, but that's my own stuff that I'm working through. So I really appreciate it. And just before I kick it off, if I can ask Renee to give me when I have 15 minutes left, because I'll know where I should be at that point, and my speed ahead. So before I actually start my PowerPoint and sharing the work of several artists, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is really important, especially when we're talking about social and racial justice. So first, I want to acknowledge that the first inhabitants of New York City are the Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape people. We must pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence and struggles on their homeland. So no conversation about social and racial justice can be had, really, without acknowledging that we all stand on occupied Lenape land in New York City. So I just wanted to open with that. And I am going to share my screen. So bear with me 1 second. Okay. Okay, so whoopsie, sorry. I'm gonna go all the way back up to this. Okay, whoops. Nope, didn't want to do that. Sorry, let me just get to here, present. Okay. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about activist art and what I call socially engaged art. And of course, this work has been going on, has existed for many, many, many decades, if not centuries. But it's been sort of, I call it sort of the trendy hot topic in the last 10 years, right? All these sort of terms have sort of arisen, and socially engaged art has sort of really stuck. So it's something that I'm still trying to get used to, even doing the work I've been doing for a long time, and other folks that I know. And so now it's all of a sudden something that's fundable, something that's being supported, that's acknowledged, which is great, which is really great. But so we'll get into that in a minute. But this is just a little bit about me. I know you've read my bio probably, but just wanted to say that the next session will return back to my own work a great deal. And I just wanted to also say that for the next session, I'll be talking a lot about my socially engaged work, and particularly with Chinatown Art Brigade, which is work that I've been doing with some tenant rights organizations in Chinatown, using art and culture to elevate anti-displacement stories. So today we're going to talk about socially engaged art, and give you a survey of some artists that I really admire from the past and present, mainly present. And then, as I said, next week, next session, I'll talk about my own work a little bit more. And I think it's important. I mean, I'll just say off the bat that I know that it sounds like actually most people did the readings, which is great. Because at first I told Sam, oh, well, people actually do the readings, and people have done them. So that's really great. But I'll do a lot of summing up, and I'll refer to it lightly. And I know it was the two databases of socially engaged artists, as well as the readings, the 3 readings, right? And I'll mainly touch more on Pablo Aguirre's socially engaged art piece. But I just wanted to say in a nutshell, I think that what's really exciting about, art and activism, right? And this newer way of looking at art and culture as a way to sort of elevate social justice has become more recognized, right? Because it's not a product, it's not something, right, which Pablo Aguirre talks a lot about. It's not like a thing that you get to collect, right, which is how you gain social capital, right, in the art world, and then you gain value on your work, right? That's a lot of the artists that I'm going to be profiling are not about that, right? I mean, sure, they have to make a living, they have to make ends meet, but that's not why they're in the work. So it's very different as far as the purpose of why they're doing their work, right? It's across disciplines, different fields of knowledge. And I think that, when we talk about this work, I would love to hear your thoughts, right? Because we, as teachers, right, we all want to have a critical thinking cap on and look at the interrelations between the artists and their works and the intended audience that they're trying to reach. I think a lot of this work is about demystifying the art making process, right? Deprofessionalization of the art field, right? So not to say that people should not be compensated, but that, this is very much de-celebrity, it's not about the celebrity artist, right? It's much more about the participatory art practices that blur that line between who is an artist and the audience itself. And engaging with the audience is key to activist art. And understanding that there's a wealth of knowledge there in the audience members or whoever is experiencing what you're presenting, and then to interrogate those relationships between what we call praxis, right, theory and practice of historical movements, and really to ask the critical questions. The political is the political a viable terrain for cultural production, especially now, right? What is a socio-political context for artistic response, right? And I think we are constantly asking ourselves that as artists and maybe even as teachers, like sort of like, is this kind of just are we just in this little bubble, or are we actually responding to the times of today? And really questioning the motives and intents of artists, like what is it for, art for who, art for what? And I just want to open with this quote because this keeps me going quite a bit as someone who, has started out as an activist and then now an artist and multimedia maker, is this James Baldwin quote. And he says, "The role of the artist is exactly the same as the role of the lover. If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see." And I think that for me as a socially engaged artist and activist and even educator, it's about unveiling those things that maybe given who you are and your privileges or lack of, whatever it is, your own set of circumstances may not see the things that are really obvious to maybe to some. So I wanted to just touch on, we all know when we talk about arts and culture, right, we're talking about these spaces, right? And now more and more, even pre-pandemic, but especially now, a lot of this is virtual, right? It's online. And now people are looking at immersive technologies, right? AR, VR, immersive media, and how are these, is this how can this kind of promote certain ideas, right, and stories? And we're immersed in it every day of our lives. We walk out the, door of our apartment and we're already, it's in front of our face on our phones every second, right? And then I want to also shout out what's so incredibly important, right? This kind of work, and I'm sure you all know, I can't see anyone right now, but I'm sure you all know these two pieces are from Emory Douglas, right, who was the minister of culture in the Black Panther Party in Oakland. And arts and culture, right, really puts a human face on an issue. It moves people to action. And that's incredibly important, right? These newspapers that they produced and started first with just black and white printing press, and then they were able to afford color, which you see that here. And then it's able to, again, you really put a pulse on what the sort of national reckoning, for instance, now. And these are images, of course, from the Black Lives Matter when it was first founded with the death of Trayvon Martin back in 2015, 2014. And then some posters, right? These posters that we see, that these were from the protests of Donald Trump when he was first inaugurated, right? And these are all, kind of amazing works and social media and all of this. But this is not sort of what we're going to be talking about, although that's really important, that one way sort of communicating ideas, right? And for those to be consumed by us, right? Whether we're taking a sign and holding it up at the protest, or adding a hashtag, right, not to minimize it, to a post, right, to promote a cause. But socially engaged art is, again, much deeper, and it really involves deep engagement with the community. And so I'm going to just pull two quotes really quickly, and then we'll get into examples from Pablo Higuera's Education for Socially Engaged Art. So socially engaged art as a category of practice is still a working construct, right, he says. In many descriptions, however, it encompasses a genealogy that goes back to the avant-garde and expands significantly during the emergence of post-minimalism. The social movements of the 60s led to a greater social engagement in art, and the emergence of performance art, installation art, centering on process and site-specific city, which all in influence socially engaged art practice today. And all of the almost all of the artists I'll be presenting today are all doing very much localized site-based work, because what they center is the social engagement and working with community members, right, who are not necessarily artists. They're community members who care about the issue or directly impacted by the issue. And then the second slide here, he talks a little bit more about social practice. He says it obscures the discipline from which socially engaged art has emerged. So there's this sort of interplay between social practice and socially engaged art, right? But he says that in this way, it denotes the critical detachment from other forms of art making, primarily centered and built on the personality of an artist. So it's really, again, about decentering this one artist and the celebrity artist, right? That is inherent to socially engaged art, almost by definition, that is dependent on the involvement of others besides the instigator of the artwork. So, whoops, I don't know what just happened here. Sorry about that. I don't know. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I wanted to acknowledge, and I will be putting links, or maybe I can send them to Renee and get them to you, but I definitely want to acknowledge that a number of collectives who started doing this work, back in the 60s, as Higuera mentions, right? And you might maybe sort of recognize some of these images from different groups, but Art Workers Coalition, the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, the Guerrilla Girls, Grand Fury, who, silence equal death, right? That has sort of been an iconic symbol. The Electronic Disturbance Theater, which is in the middle, the cell phone that you see with the tracker with water. And they created this back in the late 90s, created a mobile cell phone tool where it was helping immigrants who were undocumented immigrants crossing the border to figure out how to get to water and to avoid even border patrol, right? This is back in the day. They were able to create this technology. And so just to say that the top right image is Faith Reingold, who many of you probably know is an amazing artist. There was, once they protested and then there were no women in an exhibit, then it became, well, yeah, you have white women, but you don't have any women of color, right? And so there's this constant battle. And so a lot of this work sits on the backs of really kind of paying tribute to the folks who really kicked off this kind of work. So Martha Rosler, I just want to show some images from her work. I know you all read the piece, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about her work as an artist. She's a professor. She's retired now, I think. She's just a prolific human. She's just amazing. But if you lived here from 1989, and she basically transformed a gallery into a space, and she worked with a bunch of housing rights activists, as well as folks who were currently at that time or formerly homeless, to put this work on. So it's a vivid demonstration of how art can really constitute a radically different approach and transforming a space, right? So it's not only a diversity of objects, but can contextualize a social field in and from which the objects are produced and derive meaning. So for her, right, the art exhibition wasn't separate or isolated from the rest of the world. It's objects from the conditions in and under which those objects have been produced came into the space. So there was no separation, right? It wasn't that, oh, it had to be clean walls and these paintings that, or works that were framed so neatly, right? And so she, back in, of course, there were those that came before her, but it was a kind of a radical thing to transform a commercial gallery, because she knew she already accumulated a certain amount of social capital to be able to do this. So Mayor Koch, as you probably maybe all remember, he had a famous quote that said, if you can't afford to live here, move, right? And so that really kind of was the impetus for her exhibition. And so these are just some more stills. Part of her research-based work was partly curated with other folks, right? And she did public programmings, screenings. She had auxiliary events, indoors and outdoors. Like I said, she really addressed the issue of housing and homelessness. And I'm going to show you a little bit more. This was supposed to sort of simulate a homeless shelter. And she worked with a self-organized group of homeless people and calling it Homeward Bound, which is what you see on the right. And also with groups like Madhousers, right? A group of radical, it was a radical architecture collective. And she worked with a lot of advocacy folks, right? A lot of advocacy groups. So they took the actions outside, built structures. And this is the group of folks that she worked with in '89. Then she did an updated version, opening with the Koch quote, sort of reviving some of the pieces from the '89 work, but also adding some new work. So this is actually from the old show on the right, which is photography from the Bronx in the late '70s and the '80s. By a photographer, and then research and archive material that she did back in the day, and then also more recently. I'm going to move on to talk about the Redlined Public Project. And please chat, put it in the chat if you have questions. I just want to, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but this is some, really meaningful, sort of diverse range of works that I really would like to introduce you to. But Redlined Public Project, so we all know what redlining is, right? And every city had these maps, right? That the city will, and really the federal government would put out certain neighborhoods that were riskier, right, to live in than others. Basically meaning code was, right, they had a high number of people of color living there, so they were the red zone, right, danger zones. So anyway, this project though in particular was actually done in Boston, in the sort of greater part of Boston, back in 2015. And I'm just going to share really quickly some images. Over 1,000 pounds of brick red chalk and brick mixture filled this machine, right, that you see here. And they walked all around the city with volunteers. They redlined public, the public streets where areas were redlined back in the day and are still considered unofficially redlined because it's cost prohibitive for Black Americans to even live in some of these neighborhoods. So a lot of people, curious passerby, stopped them and said, what is this exactly? And they talked about, what redlining was, and wanting to trace the history of it on the actual pavement with this red chalk. And Jamaica Plains is mostly, this area mostly resembles parts of Queens, right, where there are these single and multifamily homes, for those of you who have been to Jamaica, Queens. But here in Boston, it's really similar in that it was very affordable at a certain point for people of color to be able to buy their homes, right? A lot of trees and that kind of thing. But whole blocks have been converted because of gentrification into condos. So a lot of these volunteers chatted with passerbys, and while they invited them to help crush bricks that were recycled, and it was a really community building event. But that was, so the process of this, the social engaged piece of it, is leading up to it, as well as the actual action, and then the post, I guess, the sort of the after action, right, which is sort of getting together and talking about it, and engaging new people, and understanding that these are systems. It's not just individuals that choose to move out or get kicked out. And then I'm going to now move into Black Lives Matter, which Some of these images are from actually from the uprisings from 2014-15. But some of you may recognize some of these images, but I think it's important to sort of highlight some of this work that was done collectively with activists who are on the ground, and those artists are directly impacted as well. And so if some of you remember this march on MLK Day, probably 2014 or 15, and these are the eyes of Eric Garner, right, who was strangled to death by cops in Staten Island. And it was very powerful. I remember being in that march, and having that be the head of the march was quite powerful. Here in St. Louis, you know, when Mike Brown died, this is now jumping ahead a year, protesters actually culture jacked a fountain and ran it in blood during a baseball game. And what I guess we would call sort of like a culture jamming kind of hijacking event that many folks were actually very much behind. This is by an artist, Damon Davis, who did this reflection of the police officer who actually killed Mike Brown as they were carrying the you know, this is obviously a prop, but a casket, and this sort of idea that as cops were approaching them, sort of a reflection back on the cops, right, with this coffin. I'm going to share, I think performance is actually a huge part of a lot of, you know, particularly African-American artists in this time of reckoning and healing, who have produced pieces that are really, you know, I think, not to get into the weeds, but with socially engaged art, a lot, maybe toward the end of the book, which I don't think I assigned the first chapter, toward the end of the book, he talks about, right, what the documentation, is it the actual event, or is it the documentation of the event that becomes the work that is shared widely? And I certainly think with all of this work, it's definitely the documentation of the work that is the socially engaged piece, right? Because many times this work is done in isolation, and then you're sharing it out. And sometimes it's both. It's the act of it, and then the actual sharing of it, right? They're both part of that socially engaged process. But I'm going to share just a few minutes by this artist, Taja Lynn. Whoops, let me just, sorry. I'll talk about it after we watch this. Can you guys hear it?
No.
No? Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to go back here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Shoot. You shoot anywhere you shoot. shoot anyway, you shoot, shoot. Shoot, hands up! Don't shoot! Washington, D.C. Shoot, hands up! Don't shoot! Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Deja vu, Houston, Texas. Deja vu, Austin, Texas. Deja vu, Los Angeles, California. Deja vu, Savannah, Portland, Oregon. Deja vu, Saratoga Springs. Deja vu, New Orleans, Florida. Las Vegas, Nevada. Deja vu, Virginia. Cleveland, Ohio.
I'm just gonna speed forward to a little bit toward the end, and I can provide links if you wanna, whoops, you guys wanna watch it. I'm just gonna, whoops, sorry, toward the ending here. So it goes on. It's the full piece is about 10 minutes, I believe. I'm gonna move into, sorry, let me just start this again. Dred Scott, maybe some of you know this artist, seeing some nods. Yeah, and of course his real name is Scott Tyler, I think, but named after the formerly enslaved person who basically fought for his freedom. This project gained a lot of attention, but Dred Scott is really a really amazing artist, and he's really done a lot of great work. He's based in New York City, and he's done reenactments. And specifically, he's always sort of at a protest. He's always there at any action. So he's really also engaged on the ground. But this was his biggest sort of venture yet, which is project Slave Rebellion Reenactment in New Orleans in 2019. And it was a 5-year long project where he was going down there quite a bit and working with the community to put this on, right? Because it was one of the successful rebellions in a way, one of which, anyway, you know, was very bloody at the end. But I think he wanted to do this, and he wanted to use it as a way of doing this kind of reckoning that we're all talking about, this racial justice reckoning. So he was actually talking to white folks and Black folks down in New Orleans. And as you can imagine, it's a very touchy subject for especially those folks who perhaps are descendants of plantation and slave owners. And the folks who obviously have ancestors that came from ancestors that were enslaved. And so actually he did these workshops, and he talks about one person who asked, well, how are you gonna, a bunch of Black folks marching with rifles, how are we gonna ensure their safety, right? Given, again, this was conceived in 2015 and it was done in 2019. And so a lot of things, a lot of questions and a lot of emotions, I think, came up for folks and working through that. And so it was the piece around getting buy-in from community members there who had a history down there, along with just raising the funds for a production to be done like this, the costumes, the whole thing. And so I wanted to share a little piece that The Guardian did on this.
The state of Louisiana has memorialized the largest rebellion of enslaved people in U.S. history with a road sign. I'm glad that there is a sign that marks it, but I also think that to mark this most magnificent event with a sign and a traffic island, by the side of a highway, that's crazy. Other people have tried to sort of mark this event, often focusing on the brutality and the suppression of the rebellion. And what I'm interested in is the liberatory aspects of the people who are fighting to free themselves.
I'm gonna put it under here with the rest of the lighter elastic because it's got stirrup width to it.
For me, being born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, my whole experience in Louisiana has been learning more about my roots and about my family's experience before me, my ancestors. So just getting this opportunity here is really powerful for me.
I'm a heavy equipment operator for the city, and I also work at Mead City Carriages in the evening, and I ride horses. That's the story of my life. This is going to be the most information I've ever had from the other end of it, you know what I'm saying? Because they teach you what they want you to know in history in school. So,
Know this.
yeah, I didn't know anything. I was interested in horses, and if I knew there were Black people riding horses in the 1800s, I would have probably been a little bit more intrigued by it than what I actually was, being that I only knew Black people were slaves in the 1800s as far as the books that I read, you know what I'm saying?
This is a new way in for people to look at this history and to say, well, here's what's really been suppressed and something that should be celebrated. This is something that people should be truly proud of. It could have changed U.S. and world history. Imagine if there were an African republic in modern day Louisiana, but before westward expansion has really happened. So does Texas secede from Mexico? Does Los Angeles become part of California? Would enslaved people all over the rest of the lower South have decided, well, we should rebel and escape there? So it is, a hugely significant event in U.S. history, and the history has been buried.
I'm not acting, I'm having a whole experience with a bunch of other Black people who have come to New Orleans for multiple different reasons to take part in this. Being around other Black people carrying weapons, embodying the spirit of freedom and emancipation, I think that's really powerful.
So I'm going to stop there. And again, I will share the links because it's a very powerful piece. Sorry, I'm just going to move on to the next. Whoops, hello. I know I have about 12 minutes or so. I just want to move into some other work that on different topics. Not sure if you all know who Wendy Red Star is, but she basically is a Native American artist, photographer, and she did something that was really interesting in her, it was actually part of Photoville this year, which is a photography exhibit. It was all outdoors this year. and it is, as is every year, but this one was very special. But she annotates photos, right, to restore the dignity and context and provide context, especially photographs of Crow chiefs, because they're often, you know, photographed in their regalia, but there was no, you know, in a very sort of exotified way, but there was not context that was really given to what we were seeing. And so she kind of, I'll just share with you a little bit. It was really interesting project. See if I can forward it there.
I'm at the Portland Art Museum with Wendy Red Star.
I'm just gonna
two images of Medicine Crow, and what I found was that they were delegation portraits taken in 1880, and Medicine Crow and 5 other chiefs traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president, discussing land and territory, and the Pacific Railroad was going to be placed through our territory.
These peace delegations, different Native Americans would travel to Washington for negotiations.
I had been seeing images of Medicine Crow being used for giant murals and for honest tea, and it made me wonder, do they know who Medicine Crow is? Do they even know that is his name? And do they know why he sat down to take this photograph? And I could say that probably not.
So these are images that were appropriated for commercial use. Their meaning was transformed for other purposes. And there's a kind of devaluing of these people and of the culture that they represent that results.
As a Crow woman who grew up on the Crow Indian reservation, I am viewing these men as something totally different than a non-Native person or a non-Crow.
So these were images that were constructed by Anglo-Americans. These were not constructed by the Native Americans.
No, but the beauty of looking at these portraits is you can see their personality and their style, creating this tension between the white photographer's perspective and that government perspective and their own individuality and their own pride too, of showing who they are and who their nation is.
And for photographs from 1880, they're really sharp. They convey a lot of visual information, but you haven't left the photographs alone. The figures are enlivened by these annotations with arrows and outlines accentuating who they are and what they're wearing with a level of detail that invites the viewer to spend time looking.
If we look at this full-length portrait of Medicine Crow, looking at this thing that looks like a bow, it's called a hair bow. In order for him to wear that, he had to do a certain war deed. In this case, it was to overcome an enemy and to slice their throat.
So this was a vehicle for you personally to investigate Crow history, but more specifically, the history of these individuals.
I wanted to show the viewer that these are real people. These aren't just a symbol of the Native spirit or a chief. I wanted to show that this is much more complicated than this aesthetically pleasing image.
And I think that was especially important because C.M. Bell, the photographer who was responsible for these images, is sometimes criticized for not having even identified the sitter, sometimes failing to identify the nation that the man came from. And so you're reasserting their individuality, their place within their own society in a way that restores them to our common history.
They didn't really care about them as individuals.
So I'm going to stop there, but I will say that, you know, she's obviously of the Crow Nation, but she worked very, you know, she has an interview where she talks a lot about just her accountability, right? And that's the case with many First Nations, and getting the blessing to be able to do this and tell the story right, and doing the research. And so a lot of her work is also very much research based in her own community, to even put that out. And I believe some of those pieces were also part of an exhibit, a feminism women artists exhibit at Brooklyn Museum, I believe. So maybe you guys have seen it. I'm going to just share a few more images. So native placemaking, which is a term that's been coined, which really again is about, it's for and by Native folks, artists who are using the work I'll share with you to really empower the next generation of cultural practices and languages that may be disappearing. And so this one quote from someone from a tribal member from the northern, is it Cheney? I think I'm pronouncing it right. Maybe I'm not. But culture and the arts are quintessential for how we develop community. And so a lot of the projects that they have sort of initiated, and it's various tribal nations, but a few in particular, for instance, this Red Feathers development group, they actually train folks like really practically how to beautify their own houses, right? And how to insulate their houses, right? Especially, and in this case, how to create patio furniture, things like that, that are very, very sort of practical. This other one here, also, this is in Montana, again, creating sustainable, sort of promoting sustainable energy, green energy, and teaching folks how to do that. Is a part of that placekeeping work. So Rolling Red's Arts is basically a mobile, and I'll kind of talk over it as I'm sharing a little bit about this. I'm just going to show the images. Whoopsies. But I'll just share really quickly as you're looking at these images, that it's a state-of-the-art mobile art space. That basically is a training center and a mobile bank on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. So basically what they do is they actually train folks, artists and cultural workers and cultural bearers, so that many of them hold these traditions, but in many ways, unemployment is very high on this reservation. So it's about also how to actually sell your art, sell your work, and actually be able to create your own self-sustaining economy within the community. So I'm going to share, I'm going to now sort of
to actually do
increase the volume here.
I can try to be a professional artist.
Pine Ridge, home to the Oglala Sioux tribe, is enormous. A 3,000 square mile reservation of arid lands, long plagued by high unemployment and few economic opportunities.
Well, so how hard is it to survive as an artist living here?
One of the biggest challenges is the distance. And
just how big this place is,
yeah,
and how hard to get around.
Yeah, how big, how rural it is, and so the opportunities, become less because the distance is so great.
I'm just going to forward it a
Dave
little
is
bit.
eager to work with older artists here. He's early in his career, and it turns out, just sold his first piece of artwork for $50.
What I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to tell a story with my art. I want to instill the values and the morals of Lakota culture into my artwork. It's not at that stage yet, but it will be.
Beyond transportation and training, the project also offers banking services through a partnership with the Lakota Federal Credit Union. Shayna Ferguson is a manager and loan officer.
I'm just going to stop it there. I know I'm at time, Renee. Can I share one more example?
Absolutely.
Okay. I just wanted to share one. As you can see, I'm always, this is me all the time. I have all these slides and I'm like, I want to share. Okay, so I'm just going to go through actually, I'll just spend a few more minutes if I can, just some of this work. And I love these artists dearly, and they really did some great work. This is a little bit ago, about 2009, I think is when they did this project. But Gabriela Munoz and Janea Sanchez, I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but I know Gabriela. So what they did was they basically did this collaboration across this fence, right, that divides Mexico and the US. And this collaborative project with artists on the other side, right? So these are the US artists, Mexican-American artists. On the US side here that you're seeing, working with artists on the other side in Mexico. And they just sort of did this sort of this border tapestry. And it was called Tapestry of Guadalupe, which is a saint. It was a participatory project that invited community members to come and help trace and help make the work. But the actual the piece itself, right? There was a certain amount of people, right? But there's border patrol there and all of this, so that created it. But their piece was really moving, because I thought I had a video here, because it was the actual product itself of of the video itself that they shared out that was widely seen. So I'll just share just a few moments here of it. Let me just.
So it's really important for us to weave La Virgen on the yucca paper onto the actual fence so that she stands on that liminal space back and forth. So moving down further where there's no mesh to weave her.
I'm going to speed ahead a little bit. As you can see, different people came by, participated, looked, and you're seeing both sides, right, of this, both sides of the fence. Then last thing I will share, and I want to share this because there's actually an event if folks are interested coming up. Whoops, hello. Tomorrow evening, I believe. I'm just going to share, these are some photographs from a wonderful photographer, Cynthia Briones, who basically, these are families who are in sanctuary, who've been in sanctuary for years now in a church in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. So, but this is the piece I wanted to land on, and it's called Immigration and Power by Krzysztof Waterzysko. I can't say, and it was a Polish last name. I slaughter names all the time, but I wanted to share a little bit of what he did, which is kind of an amazing project that is ongoing. He started it a little bit before the pandemic, and then it will conclude with a celebration and a whole Zoom call tomorrow, actually. And I'm going to read a little bit about this work, and I'll just stop with this piece. But Ustedes, them, is work by Krzysztof that basically co-ops drone technology that's often employed by governments for border surveillance operations as a medium to broadcast the voices and perspective of immigrant refugees. So this New York City iteration, he basically worked with just different groups and different folks who were impacted by bans and separations and policing and focused on labor exploitation. And so he has another, he launched another version of this, but again, flying drones. And you'll see it's drones with eyes of the people who are talking, and it's their voices. And it's very powerful. And I'm just going to share 2 minutes of this and then end on this.
Mi nombre es Ita Yosara Pérez Prada. Es decir, que siempre le pedí a Dios una oportunidad como esta de salir de mi país. Pero resultó que en el mes de octubre del 2019 tuve un accidente dentro de la van de la compañía, donde ya veníamos de laborar. Al no estar yo al tanto de qué me acoge en este país o no, siendo indocumentada, después de mi accidente, mi jefe no se pronunció ante mí a decirme qué necesitaba o si tenía una dolencia o algún dolor. Tuve una conmoción en mi parte izquierda de la cabeza. En el momento, pues, he averiguado en el hospital de Elmus, el cual donde me dieron mi atención, que estaba casi por $8,000, no quieren responder. Entonces, pasé una situación bastante difícil, casi 5 meses recuperándome. porque eran bastantes los dolores de cabeza, yo me sentía muy desamparada, he pasado bastantes necesidades aquí, pero siempre luchando, siempre pensando que aquí hay oportunidades y siempre cogiéndome de Dios, e incluso porque yo digo, si estoy sola aquí, tengo solamente a mi hijo, pues debo salir adelante.
Okay, I will stop sharing now. There was a lot more I wanted to get into, but I want to make sure there's a little bit of time to discuss with you all. So
great. Thank you so much, Betty. That was a really nice array of different kinds of examples. And I'm wondering, maybe we could just go ahead, either Betty, you could look in the chat, or we could have people raise their little blue hands if you'd like to pose a question. I know that one of the questions asked here that teachers always would like to know is whether you'd be willing to share your slides. So that would be great.
sure, yeah, absolutely. The thing with the slides is some of them are linked to, because with videos, I always download them because they just suddenly disappear. And so I'm just trying to think if I can share them, and then I think most of them still have links. It might take me a minute to scroll through them and figure it out. But yeah, I can probably link the slide to the video if it exists on YouTube or Vimeo or something. But yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Nikki, you want to jump in and ask your question?
Yeah, actually, first of all, thank you. That was an amazing presentation, Betty. And I didn't even know a lot of those artists and projects, so I'm going to look into them more.
Oh, cool.
But the last one, I just have a comment about the last one, Christo Wojcicko. The title, I'm just confused because it's called Ustedes and then parentheses, them. And, I'm sure every Latino in here was like, Ustedes does not mean them. Ustedes means you. And like ellos mean them. So like, what are we talking about? Like, is that a, I just have to wonder, like, is that a conscious decision on the artist's part, or is that like some kind of a terrible, mishap, kind of typo in a title of a piece that's about Latinos? So, it's just like driving me crazy. So I had to say that.
I can, let me put the chat. Oh, I'll put the link in for the event tomorrow, which I'm sure is going to be very well attended. I have to say that I think his work is really awesome, amazing. And actually, I really admire his work. He's done this work. His claim to fame was something called the homeless vehicle, which if you look it up, there's tons of academic journals, even in articles about it. But Christoph did this thing called the homeless vehicle, and he launched it in front of Trump Tower, infamous Trump Tower, like in the 80s maybe. And it was this idea of like this unit that it wasn't literally that you can sleep in it, but it was supposed to be a unit that you can actually sleep in as a homeless person. And he worked with homeless folks to design it. So he has a little bit of, and I'm actually in a show with him at the Queens Museum about home. And so, and I do admire his work, but there's a little bit of parachuting in his work, right? That he's very conscious of that, but because he's the star artist, I struggle to, I was thinking maybe I shouldn't show this, but I said, oh, let me show it and see what you all think. Because it's always important to have those discussions, positive or negative, where he was like, he got a big budget and he's a well-known artist. So it's like, hey, work on this issue. To his credit, he really leaned on other folks who are from the community. I think that he was very much deliberate about this title. My understanding, it was like very much like, this is our stories. And then speaking to the sort of average American who's like their stories. But I'll find it and put it in the chat now so that you can at least find out more about his work or this particular project. But I feel you. I'm curious what people think, but I always show, and when I teach at Pride, I show stuff that's really controversial, and I'm curious what people think, because that's important. That's as I'm sure all of you, right? It's like you don't want to put a judgment on it yet and see if people raise eyebrows or whatnot in the classroom, but yeah.
I want to echo what Nikki was saying too. This is Fred. I put I put it in the chat too, because it's huge, because it's the title and it's the first thing you see, and it's question. It's the big question. So it's hard to watch the rest of it when you like, what is it? You're automatically distanced from it as someone with language. Language is like the ultimate entry point. And so that really did a number on me. And it could be us and them, but that's not what it says. So, and why would it be? So it's really a weird, I loved what you presented, but that definitely was problematic for me as a viewer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
because it's so often that I see that, Betty. You see that all the time, where it's just like taken for granted. Words are just words, but they're, language is how we can completely, go beyond language, but you need language to do that.
And but I also feel like it's about like the respect of translation and translation in the deeper sense, right? Not just translating languages, but translating experience, translating whatever, translation with a capital T, right? It has to be done with respect. And it's so often not done with respect that it's problematic when it's like you said, like in the title, and you have to wonder, like, is this just a massive lack of respect right here that you can just like the people who, it makes me feel like the people who will know that this is a wrong translation, who cares? Doesn't matter,
Right.
That's problematic. Yeah.
Or is it even, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, a lot of shock value work out there, which again, there's something for everyone out there, right? So a lot of his stuff has those roots, he's got a little bit of everything. And I think you're right. I mean, I think it's purposeful, but that alone, right? There's like the intent and then the actual impact on people, right? Is it having what's the impact that it's having on you as a viewer? And that's totally valid. I have mixed feelings about the piece too. But I'm intrigued by the idea, but I have mixed feelings. Yeah, totally. Yeah. What are other people's thoughts?
I mean, for
not just that piece, but yeah.
For one thing, it got you all talking, and it got us educated in the fact that there is an issue. Spanish is up. I don't know Spanish very well. I took it in school. It's something that was required, but I am not a Spanish speaking person, and hearing you, all of you, discuss that issue to the level and the extent, I'm like, okay, you're right. Language is powerful, and the use of it has deeper connotations and meaning. So I really appreciated it. It got you all talking.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question, if somebody would like to come to the fore.
I was just going to say we should ask Christoph at the talk tomorrow.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, I think whoever, Kate, you asked this question about appropriation. Yeah. And it's one of those things where I think I just have to say that as a socially engaged artist myself, a lot of my work is about my own community. And I think there are people who assume when I don't make work about my own community, like how do you have, like I made a film about anti-war veterans coming home from war from Iraq, right? I'm like, well, do you have a background in military family? So it's one of those things where, I would love to have a discussion. I know a lot of you are artists yourselves and integrating this into the classroom. Can you only make work about your own experience and where you're from? Or is it something where it's not such a fine line, it's a blurred line where you're collaborating with those folks who are directly impacted, right? So I know that we see the nuances and all that, and I just say that, then I personally get insulted when people are like, oh, I didn't think you would make work like that, right? Because it's not about a Chinese American issue or immigration issue or gentrification, which is something, in Chinatown that I work on. And so it's really very nuanced. And I think he might have missed the mark with this. I think that there was a way you could do it in a very socially responsible, accountable way to the community. But again, I don't want to speak for, there's a lot there. But yeah, those are questions that I would love for folks to think about and percolate on, because, far too often we're just like, if you're white, you can't make work about a Black person. And if you're Asian, you can't make a work about a Black person. And not to say that isn't true, but there's got to be more to the conversation, right? If you're taking away resources from those artists or those folks who are directly impacted, to be able to make that work, that's a huge problem. And we see that, right? Like maybe a Latinx artist might have done a better job than Christoph, right, in doing this. So it's those things that we do have to challenge ourselves in quite a bit, but we all know it's very complex.
But it's also like you got to be open to criticism, right? Like
Exactly.
if we agree that yes, you can make art about anyone you want, and I think that that's how I feel about it. You can do whatever you want. Like that's one of the beauties of art, but doesn't absolve you of responsibility and protect you from criticism about what you actually did.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
I was thinking he was playing on that, the you versus them, when you were speaking with the Latino community. It's, you know, you, but when you're speaking to a white person, it's them. But then I looked up the translation for his Italian when he showed it in Italy, and it's loro, same thing, parentheses, them. And loro in Italian is them. It's not you. So that just, now I'm worried it is a mistake, and that's a huge mistake.
In Spanish,
Wow.
ustedes, just to be clear, ustedes is not you as in you, it's the plural you.
Plural you,
Right.
That's right.
Same word, but in Spanish, it's a different word. So this is plural you, parentheses them.
Right. Which is still very different.
I mean, it's been
Well,
vetted
in
by, I'm
Italian,
sure it's been vetted by many. It's more of a attention grabber type, cheap attention grabber, maybe, I don't know, but anyway. But important conversation. It's very
Well,
true.
and you're certainly illustrating how rich each and every one of these projects is. And that's such a beautiful place to start us in this conversation. And with that, I'm afraid we'll need to close today. And we look forward in a month's time, roughly, to part 2 of this session, in which we will be able to learn more about your own work and then proceed from there.